The clock on the microwave reads 1:17 a.m. In the quiet hum of a refrigerator that holds more light than food, Sarah sits at her small kitchen table. A single piece of paper lies before her, stark white under the dim overhead light. It's an official notice from the state, filled with dense, bureaucratic language, but the message is brutally clear. Her family's benefits from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, are being drastically reduced. Her fingers trace the final calculated amount, a number that makes her stomach clench with a familiar, cold dread. She thinks of her 2 children sleeping in the next room, of the school lunches she packs, the after-school snacks they count on, the simple dinner she'll have to stretch even further. This letter isn't about budgets or policy. It's a mathematical equation for hunger. It's a quiet, personal crisis unfolding in millions of homes just like hers, a silent referendum on the nation's priorities. How did we get here, to a place where a family's next meal is decided by a legislative pen stroke? To understand this moment, we have to look back. SNAP, the program many still call food stamps, wasn't born from simple charity, but from a profound national reckoning. It was formally established with the Food Stamp Act of 1964, a cornerstone of President Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty. The goal was audacious and deeply moral: to ensure that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no citizen should go hungry. Alistair Finch, a sociologist at the Kensington Institute, frames it this way. We are witnessing a policy decision being debated in purely economic terms, while its consequences are profoundly moral. The data is clear. These cuts will increase hardship. They will worsen health outcomes. They will push families who are already on the edge over it. To ignore this human cost is an act of profound ethical negligence. This sentiment is being echoed with increasing urgency. Food bank directors report that they are already stretched to their limits, unable to absorb the surge in demand that will inevitably follow federal cuts. Teachers speak of students coming to school unable to concentrate, their hunger a direct barrier to learning. Doctors in community health clinics prepare for the downstream effects: malnutrition, diet-related diseases, and the toxic stress that poverty inflicts on developing brains. The debate over SNAP is not happening in a vacuum. It is a reflection of our deepest values. It forces us to confront a fundamental question about who we are as a society. Do we believe that access to food is a basic human right or a privilege reserved for those who can afford it? For Sarah, staring at that letter in the middle of the night, the answer will determine her children's future. The political argument has reached its limit. A moral crisis is now at the door. Building on that quiet kitchen table crisis, a question of conscience is echoing far beyond Sarah's home. It is being answered not in the hushed halls of Congress, but from the pulpits, pews, and prayer mats across the nation. In a small Baptist church in North Carolina, Reverend Jackson's voice booms, not with fire and brimstone, but with a righteous sorrow. The good book asks us, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works, he preaches, his eyes scanning his congregation. And I ask you today, what is our faith worth if we stand by while the cupboards of our neighbors are bare? Miles away, in a synagogue in Chicago, Rabbi Elena Cohen gently touches the velvet covering of the Torah before speaking to a group of young adults. Our tradition is not ambiguous, she explains. The laws of kashrut are not about feeling good, they are about doing what is just. The command in Leviticus to leave the corners of your field for the poor and the stranger was not a suggestion, it was a foundational law for a just society. In a mosque in Dearborn, Michigan, an imam concludes Friday prayers by organizing a phone bank to call elected officials, reminding the faithful that the Quranic call to feed the poor is a sacred duty, a pillar of their faith known as zakat. These are not isolated events. They are the stirrings of a powerful, unified moral awakening. This response is deeply rooted in the sacred texts and traditions that have guided billions for millennia. For Christians, the imperative is woven throughout the Gospels. The ministry of Jesus is filled with acts of feeding the hungry, from the miracle of the loaves and fishes to the direct command in Matthew 25, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat." For many denominations, this is the core of the social gospel, a theological movement that understands salvation as being intrinsically linked to social justice. Organizations like Bread for the World and the Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice have been advocating on these principles for decades, arguing that public policy is a primary vehicle for living out one's faith. They see SNAP not as a government handout, but as a modern-day equivalent of the communal granaries of the Old Testament, a structural way to ensure the entire community is fed. As Sister Simone Campbell, a prominent Catholic social justice advocate, has often stated, a federal budget is a moral document. It reveals a nation's priorities and its soul. This sentiment is mirrored powerfully in Jewish theology. The concept of tzedakah is often mistranslated as charity, but its Hebrew root means justice or righteousness. It is not an optional act of kindness, but a moral obligation. The great medieval philosopher Maimonides outlined a hierarchy of giving, with the highest form being helping someone become self-sufficient. But crucially, he stressed the importance of giving adequately and with dignity. Organizations like Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger, argue that government programs like SNAP are the most effective and dignified way to fulfill this collective obligation on a national scale. They invoke the biblical laws of gleaning, where farmers were required to leave a portion of their harvest for the poor, as a blueprint for a society that builds compassion and justice directly into its economic systems. For them, cutting SNAP is a direct violation of this ancient covenant. In Islam, the principles of social and economic justice are equally central. The Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad place enormous emphasis on caring for the vulnerable, the orphan, and the poor. Zakat, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, is an obligatory annual donation calculated on a Muslim's wealth designated specifically for the needy. But beyond this, the Quran repeatedly condemns the hoarding of wealth and indifference to suffering. Islamic Relief USA and other Muslim-led organizations see their advocacy against SNAP cuts as a direct expression of their faith. They argue that a just society, one that reflects divine principles, cannot allow its members to go hungry. This interfaith consensus is remarkable. Interfaith leaders holding hands at press conferences and issuing joint statements have become a common sight. They are united by a shared belief that has been articulated across cultures and centuries, that the measure of a society's righteousness is how it treats its most vulnerable members. Of course, this view is not monolithic. Some conservative faith leaders argue for a smaller government role, emphasizing individual responsibility and the role of private charity and the church in providing aid. They might interpret Scripture through a lens of self-reliance and warn against the potential for state dependency. But even within these circles, the idea of letting children go hungry is a moral red line, creating a complex and nuanced internal debate. Yet, the dominant, rising voice is one of prophetic outrage. The letters have been written, the sermons preached. But what happens when that is not enough? What happens when prayer and protest merge into a single, unstoppable current? This growing chorus of prophetic voices, rooted in ancient scripture, is now looking to history for a blueprint. When sermons and statements are not enough, faith has often taken to the streets, transforming moral conviction into political force. The scene is Washington, D.C., May 1968. The air is thick with humidity and a sense of raw, unfinished business. Just weeks after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., thousands of people are converging on the National Mall. They are Black, white, Latino, and indigenous. They are poor people from Appalachia, the Mississippi Delta, and forgotten urban centers. They are building a makeshift city of plywood and canvas shacks at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial. They call it Resurrection City. This was the Poor People's Campaign, Dr. King's final and most ambitious dream, a multiracial coalition demanding economic justice, demanding that the nation confront the reality of poverty. The campaign was explicitly framed in the language of faith. Dr. King called it a moral crusade, a nonviolent army of the poor coming to the nation's capital to demand their rights to a decent job, a livable income, and adequate food. The campaign directly led to significant expansions in food assistance programs, laying the groundwork for the very SNAP program that is under threat today. Now, more than half a century later, the echoes of that campaign are unmistakable. Historian Dr. Evelyn Reed, an expert on American social movements, draws a direct line. The parallels are striking, she explains in an interview. In 1968, you had a nation grappling with deep social divisions and a war that was draining national resources and attention. The Poor People's Campaign sought to recenter the national conversation on the moral crisis of poverty. Today, we see a similar dynamic: extreme political polarization, vast economic inequality, and a debate over the budget that often ignores the human beings at its heart. The faith leaders calling for a new moral march are not just borrowing a tactic, they are reviving a theological tradition of public witness. This new movement, championed by figures like Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II and his revival of the Poor People's Campaign, is consciously and deliberately picking up where Dr. King left off. They argue that poverty, hunger, and lack of health care are not just policy failures, but moral injustices and sins of the state. But organizing a moral march in the 21st century presents a new set of challenges and opportunities. The planning is no longer confined to church basements and mimeograph machines. It's happening on nationwide Zoom calls connecting mosques in California, synagogues in New York, and churches in the rural South. It's being mobilized through social media campaigns that can reach millions in an instant. The goal is not just a single-day event, but a sustained season of nonviolent moral direct action. The organizers are meticulously crafting their message, aiming to cut through the partisan noise. They are not presenting themselves as a wing of any political party, but as a third moral voice, one grounded in the constitutional principle of establishing justice and the scriptural mandate to care for the poor. They are training participants in nonviolent resistance, preparing for potential arrests, and coordinating legal support. A modern protest sign with a biblical quote becomes a powerful tool, linking a contemporary political demand to millennia of moral teaching. The logistical hurdles are immense, coordinating transportation, housing, and food for thousands of people, ensuring the safety of all participants, and navigating the complex web of permits and regulations in the nation's capital. The ultimate question is, what could such a march achieve? For the organizers, success isn't just measured by a change in the SNAP budget. It's about fundamentally reframing the national conversation. It's about forcing politicians and the public to look past the spreadsheets and see the faces of the hungry, to see Sarah at her kitchen table. It's about challenging the narrative that poverty is a personal failing and reasserting the belief that it is a collective moral responsibility. A massive, peaceful, and prayerful demonstration of faith in the public square could create a political and media moment that is impossible to ignore. It could galvanize voters, pressure wavering lawmakers, and remind the nation of the moral vision that inspired the best of its social progress. The plans are being laid, the prayers are being offered. The question is no longer, faith will respond, but, and whether. A nation will listen.